Today's episode was brought to you by Wild Bill's Fireworks, PopChevy.com, and the Kent Rose Foundation. This episode is also brought to you by TheForkEnd.com. Today we welcome our special guest, Jim Zumwalt.
Hey, Harold, we got a really great guest today, an old friend of both of ours. You want to tell everybody who it is?
Well, yeah, because this is a special guy. I don't know where to start, but I'll try to make you aware of who he is. He's a lawyer extraordinaire, and he's not just an attorney, but a music attorney.
Yes.
And I mean that in a serious manner. He's a music guy.
Yep.
He's an attorney, and he's a great friend. And we have put a lot of miles on the road in the old Zumwalt. I don't know if you remember it or not. The way Jim drove, we should have had an F-15 or something like that, because we could leave an hour late and get there early. You remember we got in your Zumwalt and drove to Atlanta to see this guy that Mr. Lowry was showcasing out at an old theater in Buckhead, a kid named Winston Slade.
Okay.
And he was incredible, and had this fabulous band, a lot of the Atlanta rhythms, like J.R. Cobb was there, and all those guys that played with the rhythm section, and Bertie Higgins, and some great backup singers. Long story short, the guy he didn't do a showcase, he did a concert.
Wow.
And he was so good, and I wanted to sign him. I didn't have a knack at that time with Mr. Lowry, and he was one of my idols. So somehow, within the next 2 weeks, Winston and his girlfriend decided that he was not going to pursue a singing career. And Jim and I were so excited too, because he had done 2 or 3 what I would have said were number 1 records during that showcase that night. You remember that, Jim?
I vaguely do remember. You and I did several really famous road trips, and so the Zumwalt, I guess, was the chosen vehicle for that road trip.
The Zumwalt.
I thought you were going to describe the other road trip heading down the same way, heading I-24, except on this particular occasion, we were supposed to go see a band near Chattanooga. And it was a band that was showcasing for you, and I was driving. And this is, during the time that you were running Mercury Records. And we had our head of publicity in the back seat of the car.
Yes.
Do you remember her?
Sandy.
Sandy.
Yeah.
So Sandy was in the back seat, and you were in the right front seat, and I was driving. And as you know, you had sometimes a heavy foot, but I had a really heavy foot. So I was cruising along somewhere between 95 and 100 miles an hour. And we wanted to get to the gig.
Yeah.
And Sandy was in the back seat, and all of a sudden her hands reached over between us, and her skin had turned completely white, and her face was completely white. She had become a ghost. And she said, "You guys are driving on the highway to hell. You're taking me straight to hell." And we just thought, hey, it's another Zum Harold cruise. So anyway, we got around Chattanooga, and it was on the other side of Chattanooga, as if you were driving back up towards Knoxville.
Yeah.
We got to the gig, and we walked in, and the band had just come off stage.
That's right.
And what happened was we had forgotten that
It
it
was
changed from Central Time to Eastern Time.
Yeah.
So we got on time Central Time, but we were an hour late Eastern Time. And so they said, well, we can get up and do a couple more songs, and no, we'll set up another time. Do you remember?
I do remember.
Do you remember which band that?
I think that was Travis Tritt. I'm not sure.
I can't remember which band it was that we were going to.
But it was, well, maybe it was not. It was a band.
It was definitely a band.
Yeah, that's right. You're right.
It was more of a southern country rock.
We wound up, it was up near Cleveland, Tennessee.
Yes, correct. Correct. So we were on that drive.
Yeah, it was in the Eastern Time Zone.
It was in the Eastern Time Zone. We just didn't calculate that, even though we were very speedy in getting there, but we were still late because the band had just come off stage.
That's funny.
But to another thing, I guess it would be proper for me to say, and true for me to say that, without Jim, I probably would not have been able to do some of the things I did. I give him credit for all
Amen.
that. And he was not just my attorney. He was my mentor and my friend, and he loved music. And what, you can't get a better attorney than a guy that loves music. He was executive producer on the first Headhunter record.
I remember that.
And so he was a huge part of making that Headhunter thing come to life.
Yeah,
so that's where Jim and I really got to know each other well. However, prior to that, I had met he and Charlie Feldman at Pancake Pantry one morning. And
Charlie Feldman.
He asked me if I had any interest in running a record label in Nashville. And I was independent, and I was doing Alabama, and I'd just signed KT, and I'd cut a couple of #1 records on Reba McEntire. So I was doing okay. And but I said, well, I guess I need to think about that. And it didn't take long. 24 hours later, I was ready to go. And he got Mr. Dick Asher, who was president of Mercury and Polygram North America at that time. And he came in, and we met at the Vanderbilt Plaza for breakfast. And Jim and I had gone on one of our trips the previous night, and I was late getting there. And
that seems to be a common thing. Go ahead.
I hate being late for meetings, or I hate it when people are late for my meetings. So I was really a little embarrassed about that. But fortunately, Mr. Asher understood. Jim and I spent probably a little too much time that night at the place out on Ellison Place. What was that place?
At the place on Elliston Place. I mean, there was a place called the Gold Rush.
That's it. That's where we were. Right across.
It was right across from the exit
Inn.
Yeah. And then there was a little bar. Called the Inn. Right. And then right down from the Inn was the Gold Rush.
Yeah.
And it was really the kind of a scene for more or less the rock and roll late night scene in Nashville.
That's right.
But the Gold Rush was famous because it was a very late night place, and generally you'd go in there, and Harold, it was kind of our tradition that we at least had 6 shots of tequila. And if, they talk about 1 foot over the line, sweet Jesus, if we went to the 7th shot, then we were kind of shot.
We were ready to make a deal.
Yeah. That's
one of those nights that we were hanging out at the Gold Rush, we had a couple of ladies with us.
We did.
You were seeing this lady named Paula Erickson, who ended up becoming Taylor Swift's publicist, but you were seeing Paula, and I was seeing this lady named Kelly Kay. And these were two young kind of college students. Paula was going to Vanderbilt and Kelly was going to Belmont. And they tried to keep up with us, drinking those shots. And, we had our 6 shots and they had about 3 shots. And you had a place out in Brentwood, off Granny White, a house. Then, and we were driving them, along I-65 to your house. We made it, past Harding Road, but before we got to Old Hickory, they were in bad shape, and we pulled off the side of the road. And then they both puked for about 5 minutes. And we were so thankful that they didn't puke in your car. So we somehow, carried them into the house and let them recover and recuperate. But for you and I, it was just another, it was just a typical Harold Zum night on the town.
That's funny.
Well,
that's funny.
We helped change the scene anyway, and we were very successful as Jim being part of that team.
Yeah, man.
And he actually negotiated my contract with Mercury and Mr. Asher and made all of that happen. So without that, I would not have had the opportunity to do what I really wanted to do, which was sign stuff that I liked. If we went somewhere and to a showcase and saw a band or an act that we liked, we had an outlet for it then, and that was the big part about all that. But Jim, you remember all of this stuff, I'm sure. And I remember some of it, but you tell us about that meeting and how all of that came about.
I'll tell you a little bit about that. I had gotten my start in Memphis, and the way that I had the opportunity to start going to New York was I became the lawyer in 1978 for an R&B band, a funk band out of Memphis called the Bar-Kays. The Bar-Kays, Charlie Fash had signed them to Mercury Records, and they had a producer named Alan Jones who did not like to travel at all. So the bass player of the band was the band leader, and I was the lawyer, but I was almost kind of like the co-manager. And so it would be the bass player and I that would do all the trips to New York to Mercury Records. And we went through two label presidents before Dick Asher got hired. This is Bob Sherwood, was the president of Mercury when it was still in Chicago. But then Polygram bought Mercury and moved it to New York. And then there was an LA lawyer who came in who was Bob Dylan's lawyer and a bunch of famous, and he lasted 1 year. Then they hired this guy, Gunter Hensler, who ran the classical division of Polygram over in Europe, and he managed to survive until about 1985. And then Dick Asher had been hired by Clive Davis at CBS, which, Columbia Records, CBS, and he was head of international for CBS in England. And then he came back to America when he was offered the opportunity to become president of Mercury Polygram, which then he came in around 1985. So over the course of between 85 and 87, or late 87 or early 88, when Charlie Feldman introduced me to you, Dick and I had signed a couple of other artists. I signed an artist named Tom Kimmel to Polygram. He had a
great artist, by the way.
He had a hit called "That's Freedom," and And I signed, I signed a couple of other artists.
You signed a band out of Atlanta too. What was that band?
I didn't sign a band out of Atlanta to Dick Asher. I mean, I signed the Georgia Satellites, but I signed them to Elektra in '86. But anyway, Anyway, as the story goes, Dick Asher was a really, 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 athletic, competitive guy, and he loved to play tennis. And he did not like to lose. So I was at the peak of my game. I had been a tennis pro, and I was still playing really, really, really good tennis. So he would line up doubles matches, and right across the East River was a tennis club, and he would bring me over there, and he'd bring a couple of people in, a couple of executives, and I would be his partner, and we would just crush the other. And he just loved it. He just loved it when we crushed these other people. So he came to love me because he knew that as a partner we could crush together.
Yeah.
So that strange day, back in '88, Steve Popovich had been running Mercury Nashville, and he had a couple of good, there were a couple of good artists on the label, but the label really wasn't, exploding. I mean, they hadn't really broken something really, really, really big. And so Dick Asher called me and he said, "Jim, I've got to make a change in Nashville." And he said, "Look," he said, I trust you. I think you're the guy. I think you know what's going on and what I might need. Who would you recommend that I meet with or, talk to about being the guy to run Mercury Nashville? I need to make a change." And I said, I've got one person who I think would be absolutely great, and I think you should absolutely meet him. He's a producer named Harold Shedd, but he's not just a producer. He has a really unique set of ears, and he really has an ability to innately know what is unique or different or interesting about talent, meaning not cookie cutter, but quite the contrary, like unique artistry. And yet the ability for the unique artistry to be commercial and successful.
Today's episode was brought to you by Wild Bill's Fireworks, PopChevy.com, and the Kent Rose Foundation. This episode is also brought to you by theforkend.com.
So Harold, had come out of radio, so he had what was called radio ears, meaning he knew what was a commercial hit. But on the other hand, he had this instinct about what was unique. Well, I had a similar thing. I wasn't a musician. I came out of radio too. I got my degree in radio and television. I was a disc jockey in college.
Yeah.
My radio name was Walt James. So I had developed ears for top 40 music, not country music, but I had ears for lyric and melodies with great hooks that were hits. And I got programmed just like you were able to hear a song that you felt, but you also had the eyes and ears to see unique talent that wasn't like anybody else. So anyway, I already knew that, and I told Asher. So Asher said, "Okay, we're going to come flying down to Nashville. Please set the meeting." So they got the presidential suite at the Vanderbilt Plaza. And I showed up, and you were running a little behind because we had been out till 2 a.m. and we had broken the 6 tequila shot rule. We probably did number 7, but anyway.
We had closed the Gold Rush.
Yeah, but I said Harold will be here shortly. So and Dick Asher brought with him his number 2 guy, a guy named Bob Jameson. And, Bob had run Polygram Canada and then got brought down to America, and he ended up becoming president of RCA, Electra. He became president. Nope, he became president of RCA Records. That's right. But before that, he was the number 2 guy for Dick Asher. So it was Dick and Bob at the Vanderbilt, and then you came in, and you sat down just like you're sitting down today. And Dick Asher asked you, he said, Harold, how would you like to run a record label? And you said, well, I think I might like to try that. I think I might like to do that. Well, I need to make a change. I mean, when might you be available? I mean, could you become available? I know you're a busy producer. And you said, well, I think I could work it out. I think I could work out the time to do that. And so, literally, the meeting lasted 15 minutes. And he said, well, Harold, I'd like to offer you the opportunity to run Mercury.
Yes.
And you said, okay, well, I think I might like to do that.
Hey, can I interrupt real quick? I'm sorry, I hate to. But you've brought this incredible, Harold, you've brought this incredible, these people down this incredible opportunity. Anybody else would have shot fireworks off and said, yeah. Did it ever hit you that way?
Yeah, no. Harold was like Clark Kent. He was this mild-mannered person of not many words, very humble and very respectful. And he just said, yeah, I think I could do that, and I think I'd like to give that a try, and I'd be interested in doing that, Mr. Asher. And Dick Asher, had already researched Harold, and so it was more of a formality. He said, well, I'm going to offer you this, and I'm going to get with your lawyer, and we're going to work out a deal for you. And you said, well, that sounds mighty fine to me. Just let me know when you want me to start. And so we were in and out of there in about 15 or 20 minutes. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a complicated meeting. It was more of like just a get to know you and would you be willing to take the job? And what was unique about the negotiation was Harold, Dick Asher had a completely unique deal at Polygram where his compensation bonus was based on kind of a adjusted gross of profitability. And while he was president there, John Bon Jovi,
wow. Def Leppard.
And Def Leppard
wow.
and Cinderella
wow.
had all been signed. And so then he makes a deal with you, and you sign the Kentucky Headhunters, and I'll have a story about that, and then Toby Keith and Shania Twain and Billy Ray Cyrus and
Sammy Kershaw.
And Sammy Kershaw. And, all of a sudden, within 3 years, we had sold out of Nashville Mercury 150 million records.
Wow.
Up in New York, Bon Jovi and Def Leppard were selling, tens of millions of records. And all of a sudden, by 1991, 92, Dick Asher was making twice as much money as Alon Levy, who was
wow.
the global head of all of Polygram. And it made Alon Levy so mad that Dick Asher was making twice as much money as him that he let Dick Asher go because he was jealous that Dick was making twice as much money.
Yeah.
But what was unique about your deal is the people in New York, they just wanted hit artists, and they weren't that concerned about music publishing. So we built into your deal that if you could induce any artist you signed to actually sign publishing, that you would effectively have an employment co-venture, and you would get 50% of the net asset value of any publishing you brought in from any artist that you signed.
Right.
Wow.
Well, at that point, when we blew up some of these artists with big hits, by 1992, after Dick got fired, there was this guy that was running Mercury Polygram that was a lawyer named Eric Cronfield.
Yes.
And he worked for Alon Levy. And they wanted to renegotiate or whatever your deal. This is maybe, I can't remember, after you left Mercury and ran A&M, moved over to A&M.
And Polydor.
And Polydor, right, exactly. But Eric Cronfield, they couldn't believe how much value you had built in to this deal that you had done with Dick Asher to have half of the equity of the publishing that had come in. Of course, you had signed Toby Keith, who wrote a lot of, big hits. I mean, there was a huge amount of value. Shania Twain was, writing with Mutt Lange. I mean, it was, you had a huge amount of value in your deal. So Eric Cronfield was trying to figure out a way of not paying you the multiple that existed in your contract.
Yeah.
And so he called me on the phone and he said, there is one word in Harold's contract that doesn't exist anywhere in the music business. And since that word has no meaning, we're taking the position that we're not going to pay Harold what we owe him because, this word invalidate, it doesn't have a meaning. And it was the craziest thing I ever heard. And I knew that Eric Cronfield was just he thought he was a big shot lawyer and that he could intimidate you and me. I immediately hired a litigator in New York, and I went back and I said, you are out of your mind. We are going to litigate you, and we are going to embarrass you to the entire world that you could come up with something so ridiculous as saying a word doesn't exist that has any meaning. This is complete baloney, and we're coming after you for everything. And within 3 days, they said, okay, we're going to go ahead and pay Harold everything that we owe him. And they did. And so they lived up to the contract that Dick Asher gave you. And
wow.
That was one of my proudest moments that
Yeah.
Dick was such a fair and reasonable man that he gave you that type of an incentive in your deal to not just sign great artists, but to sign great artist writers that could bring copyright with them, and that was a very cool thing.
Wow.
And the most beautiful part of all of that is when I took the gig, I had talked to him and I just asked us, what do you expect of me? And he told me what he wanted to do, and that was make Mercury a viable country record label. So we did that through all of our trips and our signings and all of this stuff. Not to play on numbers or nothing, but we went from in 1988, the label did $8 million. 4.5 years later, we were doing $70 million a year.
Just in Nashville.
Just in Nashville.
Excuse me.
So we made Mr. Asher look good, and that's what he
made him look so good.
That's why he made all that happen.
He had great foresight and great instincts.
I love Mr. Asher. He was a great man.
He's a really great man.
He was a great man.
Right.
You made him look so good, you got him fired.
No, yeah.
Well, we made everybody a lot of money, and when you're in the record business, which doesn't exist anymore, which is a sad, sad day in America.
That is.
That we don't have a record business anymore. But the good thing was that, Harold and I together, we got to be part of the great American record business.
Yep.
Yes.
And at one point, the biggest export that America had to the rest of the world was our American records that were sold all over the world. It was one of our greatest exports. And we got to be part of that.
That's right.
And that world will never, ever exist like that again.
And you know, that would not have happened without you.
Amen.
You know, it's a combination, and I go back.
But you put it all together.
But that's what I did. I mean, my skill was as a person that had the ability to put people together.
Yeah.
But you had the ability to not only identify talent, but then know when you identified the talent, how to take that talent and take it into the studio and take their talent and make a record, and then make a record that could potentially sell on and be played on the radio and would have a large consumer base. And your instincts were impeccable.
Amen.
About, I remember the day that you and I got in the car, and I can't remember if you were driving or I was. I was probably driving. And we got on I-40 West. We went through Memphis, and we went through Little Rock, and we ended up in Oklahoma City. And we went to this funky club that this guy Fred Cortez owned, and he had a house band, playing there. And the house band was Toby Keith. Yeah. And you and I went in there, and we saw a set, and you knew immediately, that you heard 3 or 4 songs that you absolutely knew. And Toby was no kid. He had been knocking around Oklahoma and, Texas.
He was pushing 30.
He was pushing 30 years old. He'd been doing it for 10 years. But you heard songs, and one of the songs that you heard that became, to me, one of my all-time favorite songs, even to this day, was Should Have Been a Cowboy.
Oh, yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
And he had that song part of that set. So we moved forward, and we signed Toby Keith to the label, and you made the record. And then the first single was Should Have Been a Cowboy. And I remember I had an original copy on a cassette, and I flew to the south of France to a conference called Midem, and I rented a car in Nice and drove it down to Cannes, and I took Orville with me. And around that time, the French had a coin called a franc, and the franc had really reduced in value against the dollar. And I pulled a Harold Shedd because I had put some joints in my sock, and I figured back then around 92 that there wasn't going to be any French dogs at customs. So as Orville and I are driving from Nice to Cannes, I pulled out a joint and we smoked it, and I had this handful of change, and it wasn't worth hardly anything, because of the value of the dollar to the franc. I told Orville, open the window. I took that handful of coins and I just tossed it out the window because I knew it wasn't worth nothing, And so anyway, on that drive, I was playing Should Have Been a Cowboy. Yeah. And we just played that over and over again. We knew it was a hit.
Yeah.
And Toby had a lot of hits, and he had an amazing career. But out of all of the hits that he had, my favorite song was Should Have Been a Cowboy. And to me, that song still holds up today
It
as a classic.
It became song of the decade and has been played over 8 million times.
A billion.
And that's what an amazing story.
Yeah, man.
So that was just another one of our road trips.
Yeah.
Was Toby the first artist you guys signed?
No,
The Headhunters.
the Headhunters were the first, and they were actually a blues rock band from Kentucky. And they had been on a label in New York that was called Swan Song, which was, a label started by the band Led Zeppelin. And, they were a little bit of a duck out of water because they were a blues rock band from the South. And, there wasn't that much of an outlet then for that in pop culture or rock culture. But these Kentucky boys got a couple of Arkansas boys, and they got a singer named Ricky Lee Phelps and his brother, Doug Phelps, from Arkansas. And then it was, the young brothers, Richard and Fred Young from a small town in Kentucky, and their cousin, Greg, Martin,
A great guitar player.
A great guitar player. So it was a 5-piece band. They came down, and for $8,000, they recorded 8 sides at a studio right off Division Street. I mean,
It was next to the Hall of Fame Motor
Sound
Inn.
Shop.
Yeah.
Sound Shop.
Yeah, Sound Shop.
Yeah.
So, I remember that you saw the band play live, and you heard that record, and you thought that it was a really, really good record. But you felt like that you wanted to go in and cut a couple of more songs.
Right.
So we cut the deal, and you listened to the rest of their material, and you cut 2 more songs at the Music Mill on the band. And one of the songs was the last song on the album. And do you remember the title of the last song that you added to the album? Because I do. And I'll tell you if you can't remember.
I can't remember.
It was called My Daddy Was a Milkman.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
I didn't know that.
What a great song.
It was a great song, and I have a story about the song. But
Actually, they wrote that song.
they wrote that song.
And they still do it in their set every time they play.
Well, when we put that album out, the first 2 songs that were the singles the first 2 singles were covers. And they had taken an old Bill Monroe song, Walk Softly on This Heart of Mine, and they did an amazingly unique arrangement that it was not like the bluegrass arrangement.
Yeah.
And
That's a song that really caused me to pull the trigger.
because it was unique.
It was. And they were performing at Douglas Corner, and
Yeah.
when they did the verse, got to the chorus of that song, and I told Larry Shell, I said, I'm going to sign this band.
It was amazing.
I just felt like I was supposed to do that.
And the second single was "Oh Lonesome Me," which was another.
Or Dumas Walker.
No, that was the third single.
That's right. You're right.
Oh, Lonesome Me was
I
the
forgot
second.
about Oh Lonesome Me. It was.
And that was another cover of a classic country song.
That's right. Don Gibson's song.
A Don Gibson song. But the third song was a song they wrote. Dumas Walker was a number 1 hit. And ultimately, it led us to 2 Grammy Awards and 2 million selling albums.
That's
and it was an amazing. Now,
And CMA, too. Didn't he get CMA that
we
year?
got
they got country band of the year.
of the year. I mean, we won all kinds of things. But
Probably the first time Alabama got beat.
It was.
Wow.
So another interesting thing, though, was Dick Asher had hired a brand new lawyer to be business affairs at Polygram, New York. His name was Michael Kushner. And as a young lawyer, Harold and I are sitting in my office conference room, and Michael Kushner called us and said, "We're ready to close this deal, but we have a problem. We cannot clear the trademark on the Headhunters. We cannot clear it because Herbie Hancock owns that trademark. We can't call the band the Headhunters." And Harold and I looked at each other and we said, "Well, give us a minute here. We're going to try to figure this." Well, I had the same problem 3 years before because I had a band from Atlanta called the Satellites, and we couldn't clear that trademark either. And so we just changed the name of that band to the Georgia Satellites. So I'm sitting with Harold, and I said, "Well, what if we call the band the Kentucky Headhunters?" And Harold said, "Well, that sounds like a good deal to me," but he said we might have a problem because 3 of the guys are from Kentucky and 2 of the guys are from Arkansas. But the guys, the brothers from Kentucky were the founders of the band,
That's
the Young
right.
brothers.
Yeah.
So we called Richard Young and we said, "Richard, we got a problem. We got to get this deal done. We got to change the name. We want to change it to the Kentucky Headhunters." And Richard Young said, "Well, that's fine with me. You guys do whatever you need to do." So we called Michael Kushner back and we said, "Okay, we're changing the name to the Kentucky Headhunters." And they cleared the trademark, and that's how they became the Kentucky Headhunters.
And it looks like on the record it was taped on there. It added Kentucky.
It was added. It was like, and
Perfect.
the Phelps boys kind of just had to go along with the program.
You still got that big platinum on your wall?
I've got so much platinum from you, Harold. I mean, there's not room in my office for all the Harold Shedd platinum. But anyway, that was just one of those really amazingly interesting classic moments. Now, to this day, Michael Kushner ended up going to Atlantic Records, and to this day, he's still executive vice president of business affairs at Atlantic Records through all the changes that they've had at Atlantic. From Ahmet Ertegun and Doug Morris and all these, Jerry Wexler and all this history, and then Craig Coleman and Julie Greenwald, and now that's all changed. But Michael Kushner, and he's still a dear friend. When I go to New York, I try to go by and see him. But one of the very first deals he ever worked on was calling you and me early in his job, telling us that we had to change, we couldn't clear the trademark on the Headhunters.
That's great. That's great.
What a memory.
Yeah, man. Hey,
So
Jim,
what
go ahead.
did Dick Asher think about your first pick as head of Mercury as the Kentucky Headhunters?
Yeah.
I think he just trusted Harold, meaning I don't think that Dick ever interfered in any way. He gave
Not to my
Harold
knowledge.
the total reins to do what Harold needed to do and trusted Harold.
That's why it was
So
successful.
there was never an issue or a question about anything. He
Any
gave-
artist that I know
I can't recall
of.
any
I don't either.
100% support.
That wouldn't happen today,
Yeah.
just to turn somebody loose.
Well, you know what? Nothing today is like what it used to
No.
be. You can't compare today with anything that happened when we were in the great American record business. And we were just very, very, very fortunate.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, speaking
We
of,
were very fortunate.
Speaking to that point, Jim, so you were so intertwined with your clients. As Harold said, you were a music guy, you were in the publishing business, you were a talent scout, you're an attorney, you're a damn tennis pro, all this different stuff. But you created an environment in Nashville with that law firm. All you guys were music guys. It was an unusual office to me because you guys did all those things, and so many things came through your office. How did you get there? You're from Illinois. How did you get from there to doing that stuff?
Well, when I was in Illinois, when I was in high school, my mom had gotten me involved with all of the competitive speaking things. I was on the debate team and ended up 4 years as a championship debater, and I did original oratory, oratorical declamation, but I also did competitive news editing. So I had developed competitive speaking, and in the meantime, there was a disc jockey in Peoria, Illinois, named Don Baker, the record shaker, and he was a year older than me, and in 8th grade, he did a sock hop at my grade school. And I was a late bloomer. I didn't discover girls or go through puberty until 8th grade, and all I knew was I connected at a school dance that the girls all liked to dance, and I was watching the girls, and I knew that everybody was watching Don Baker, the record shaker. and so he was spinning those 45 RPM records. And so that summer, I had, because back in those days, 1959, the only music I was ever exposed to was from the television. We didn't listen to the radio. I didn't develop musical ears until I saw that sock hop disc jockey playing hits. So I went into a store, and back then we didn't have record stores. You had department stores with a little place, and you'd have albums that were like Broadway show tunes albums, or Barbra Streisand, or Johnny Mathis, or Andy Williams. What was called middle of the road music, MOR, but then there'd be a little rack, and it would have the 45 RPM records, and I just went and I bought 10 45 RPM records that were the hits of the day back in 1960, and I still remember those song titles because I took them home and I played them over and over again.
Yeah.
And that's when I became attracted to records. I mean, like that there's something special about records and girls. And, if a girl got excited about a record and you could turn, So then Don Baker, the record shaker, knew me. And so in 1963, he opened up another thing called the Coop. And there was this thing called the Why Nots that needed a disc jockey. And so he gave me a box with 300 records in it in 63. And I became the sock hop disc jockey for the Why Nots. And what blew my mind was by just standing on the stage and spinning the records, all these girls were coming up. And I still didn't have a clue. I didn't even know how to kiss a girl. I'd never kissed a girl. And this one girl, sent her girlfriend's boyfriend, and they, on a break, they walked me outside the Why Nots, and this guy and his girlfriend said, "Now the two of you do everything that we do." And so they held hands, so I held hands. And then we walked down a little pathway, and then he kissed this girl. So this girl kissed me. And I thought, oh my God, if you're up on that stage spinning records, this is a this is a good thing, It's, and so, that's when I kind of got, addicted to records and hit records. But my ears were, I wasn't cool, it wasn't like in 1963. And, the Beatles, it was still February of 64 before the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan Show. And the hit records were, there was, back in the early 60s, you had individual artists, females and males, and they were all on indie labels. They weren't on the major labels. There were these labels called VJ and Roulette and all of that. And so it was it was the evolution of the American pop business. And
Yeah.
I just got addicted. I went to college and I got my degree in radio television, and I had my own top 40 countdown show in college, and I changed my name to Walt James, and so I would play the hits on the radio. And that's where you and I are connected, Harold, because you were on the radio and you played hits. Yeah. So my ears were influenced back in those days from 1959 to 1964 by what were the popular hits on the radio. And there were a couple of radio stations, but the most important station was WLS out of Chicago.
Yeah.
There was another station called KXOK out of St. Louis, but I wasn't in the South like you in Bremen where you were listening to country music. The only country music I ever heard in Peoria, Illinois was if a record crossed over and was a crossover hit on top 40 radio, because I only listened to the hits, the pop hits.
Well, in that era, Jim, especially from 55 on, the word crossover became the word. If you could go in and record a crossover record, you didn't go in and try to do a pop record or another kind of record. You went in and tried to do then a crossover record. I talked to you about this, and that's how I learned how to program all kinds of music and put it all together. Then.
And that was for you and me both, you had that ability because you were open-minded and you had listened to every kind of genre of music. And no matter what the genre was, if there was something unique or special that caused that record to cross over and become mass appeal, you learned to start to listen and look for that and be open-minded to that. And that skill set of yours followed you all the way to Mercury Records, where you used the exact same skill sets of not looking for the obvious, but looking for the uniqueness.
Yeah.
And I always called it the chill bump test. If you and I went to see an artist or we listened to a record and it gave us chill bumps, then we knew something magical, something special.
Something was happening.
Something was happening.
Yes. That's right.
That's why when you went up to West Virginia and you saw, I had showcased Billy Ray Cyrus at South by Southwest as a rock artist.
Yeah.
And he was.
I didn't know that.
He was, he was brought to me by some Nashville agent manager, and I took him to South by Southwest. And he played he was like left-handed, and he wore these little gloves, and he was a big guy, and nobody was interested in him at all. And it was a whole year after that. I struck out, and I just said, I can't help this guy. But a year later, you got invited up to a little club in northern Kentucky, or I think Ashland, and you saw him, and you saw something unique and special about him. Correct?
That's correct.
And you decided to sign him, and nobody else would have signed that artist.
No, they would. Nope. Well, he was unique and he was different,
Wasn't it Dale Reeves that saw him?
But probably initially he was in the wrong place, the wrong format. He was not really a rock and roll guy. He was. Call it middle of the road or whatever you want to call it, but he was himself, and his appeal was as much his looks and his actions as his music, in the beginning.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to the story. I went to law school in Memphis. Memphis is a river city, and it really was, back in the 50s when Sam Phillips had Sun Records, one of the most important places in America because,
Yeah. Yep.
you know, Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash and,
Roy Orbison.
Roy Orbison.
Carl
And I mean,
Charlie Rich.
and, all of that was coming out of Memphis. And then, you know, and then, you know, Chips Moman had American Studios, and, you know, he cut a bunch of hits like on the Box Tops, "Cry Like a Baby," and you know, and so there were hits coming out of Memphis, but what Memphis had was a really large, poor, impoverished black culture, similar to Detroit with Motown, but different because Memphis was in the Deep South and Motown was in the northern Midwest. So Motown in Detroit was, you know, where there was more industry, and so artists from Georgia and Alabama, black artists, you know, would migrate maybe to Detroit. Well, artists from Mississippi and Louisiana and New Orleans would get on the Illinois Central Railroad, or you know, and they'd go up to Memphis, and Memphis had Bill Street, so it had a black culture and so when I got to Memphis, I had never been connected at all to any form of black music, but Brian Rohan introduced me, came to Memphis in 1975. He was Bill Graham's lawyer in San Francisco. He had signed the Grateful Dead, Santana, Janis Joplin, It's a Beautiful Day, and on and on. He was the most famous deal maker in America. He met me as a young lawyer in 1975, and he said, "What are you doing managing these rock bands? You're not going to get anywhere." He said, "All the talent in Memphis is in R&B. It's in the soul. Stax Records has just gone bankrupt. There's an artist named Shirley Brown. You need to get her off Stax, and I'm going to help you." So I filed petition. I got her off Stax. He sent me to New York with Shirley Brown. He said, "You check into the Essex Hotel." I checked in with Shirley. He said, "I'm going to set you up with 3 meetings," 1975. He set me up with Clive Davis, who had just started a label called Arista. He set me up with Mickey Eichner, who was the head of A&R at Columbia. And he set me up with Ron Luxembourg, who was president of Epic Records. I took Shirley in, and he already knew that Clive had missed out on Aretha Franklin because Ahmet Ertegun, Jerry Wexler had signed Aretha, taken her to Muscle Shoals, and cut hits on her. Clive didn't have an Aretha Franklin, so he thought Shirley Brown might be his Aretha Franklin. And so he offered me a record deal, and I ended up signing Shirley to Arista, and I went back to Memphis, and that made me a big deal. Because here I'm a young lawyer that went to New York and made a deal with Clive Davis, even though it was Brian Rohan who set up the whole thing. Well, I mean, one thing led to another, and I still had my rock bands, but then Rick Dees came to me, and he had a hit called Disco Duck, right at that era when disco music was big. And I started representing Rick Dees, and that's what led me to the Bar-Kays. And the Bar-Kays were signed by Mercury Records by Charlie Fash, and I became the lawyer, and that's what started me going to New York, taking the meetings with the Bar-Kays, and then going around town and meeting the other record label people. So my career was R&B and rock and roll, not country music. I had never listened to a country record. So when Francis Preston and Phil Graham and Charlie Feldman and all these people in Nashville, they knew Nashville, they felt that Nashville could be more than just a country music town, that it could become bigger than that. And they saw what I was doing in Memphis, and they wanted me to come to Nashville and do that in Nashville. And there were only about 3 or 4 people in Nashville that were doing rock and roll. One was a guy named Steve West, and then there was a young management company, Andy McLennan and Jack Emerson had Praxis. They brought me Jason and the Scorchers. I signed them in '83 to a brand new label called EMI America, and then I signed Georgia Satellites, and then I signed Walk the West as Tom Wally's first signing, and then I signed Tom Littlefield's band, and I signed Tim Krekel's band, and I signed these bands, and I started going to Atlanta and to Dallas and to Jacksonville and to Raleigh and to Louisville, and then I started going to L.A. and New York, and I did all of that between 1975 and 1982, and then I had a really big year in '82, and the folks at BMI convinced me to open up an office in Nashville, and they were fond of this lawyer named Craig Hayes, and they said, Craig just came off the road with Neil Young, he needs a job. And so I met Craig at BMI, and we got in my car and we drove down 17th and we came back up 16th. We saw a for lease sign in a yard. We wrote down the phone number. We went to a payphone. We called. The next day we went and looked at 1014 16th Avenue South. The next day we signed a lease, and I started a law firm in Nashville called Zumwalt, Ullman and Hayes in October of 1983, and it was not a country music law firm. It was a rock and roll and R&B law firm, and we were in on the ground floor of building the alternative music scene in Nashville. Wow. And it took a hell of a long time from '83 up until I signed Kings of Leon in 1999 and Paramore in 2003 and Cage the Elephant in 2006, and we put a gigantic amount of platinum, on the walls out of Nashville, where Nashville was no longer just a hillbilly country town. But then in the meantime, because of you, Nashville blew up as a country town. But you weren't just purely cookie cutter country. You were doing unique artists and help what I call alternative country pop. I mean, when you analyze the Kentucky Headhunters, Toby Keith, Billy Ray Cyrus, and Shania Twain, those aren't cookie cutter country artists. No, they're not. And they crossed over in a huge way. And in the meantime, I'm the rock and roll R&B guy, so you and I team up. And together with your eyes and ears for uniqueness and my background in top 40 rock and roll and R&B, we were kind of like a unique combination of the strangest. I mean, we were alternative, left of center. We were the Tequila Brothers. We were cruising around seeing bands. We were having a good time. And we were selling hundreds of millions of records and generating a lot of money and success. But most of all, we were having fun. Yeah. We had a good time.
We had a good time.
When did you first meet Harold?
And I met him when, as Harold said, when Charlie Feldman made the introduction at the Pancake Pantry.
Oh, yeah.
Harold used to go, they had a producer's table. And back in the 80s, a lot of the producers would go sit at a table together at the Pancake Pantry and just shoot the shit about what they were doing, what songwriters they liked, what records they were making. And I happened to be there, and Charlie just had an instinct that he thought Harold and I might connect, that there might be a connection. And it was just one of those God things of magic. You just never know. What I always tell everybody is, on any given day in your life, you should always be open-minded, because you don't know on any given day where you meet one new person and you're open-minded, and that introduction becomes a life-altering event. Yeah. And when Charlie introduced Harold and I. Now, Harold was already hugely successful, and I was pretty successful as a deal-making lawyer. But I mean, there were much bigger lawyers in New York and L.A., and there were bigger producers in L.A. and New York maybe than Harold. But when Harold and I came together, I think we had a lot to do with putting Nashville on the map as
doubt.
Music City.
Amen.
More than just this country hillbilly town of country records. And
Absolutely.
It changed the industry.
Yeah. And I think it's important to state, and that's why I'm glad you got to the Zumwalt, Allman and Hayes law firm, because people think of the deal maker attorney as just that. You guys were A&R guys that happened to be attorneys that could make the deals. You didn't just sign anybody that came in or work with anybody that came in that wanted a record deal and say, okay, here's the fee. You guys were involved on who you chose to work with, and were more than just deal makers. And that firm was so magical, and it's just as iconic as anything on the road to me.
We didn't run it as a law firm. We ran it as a record label.
Yeah.
And we didn't, I mean, we went out and we found our clients based on what we loved in artistry and music. And it was never for us about making a lot of money. It was about being connected to music and artists that we loved. And we cultivated the law firm the same way that Harold cultivated Mercury Records. It was based on choosing what we loved and what we wanted to be connected to. And that's how we built the culture of Zumwalt, Allman, and Hayes. And, by 1990 or 1991, I mean, because, we made a lot of deals. We got a lot of deals for a lot of artists. And we became so well known that by 1991, I had a client in every state, from every state in the United States and every Canadian province. That was a problem because I had 500 clients, 500 artists, which is way too many. And I had to learn a lesson by 92 or 93 that it's not quantity, it's quality. It's, nobody remembers you by all the artists that you signed that didn't become successful. You're only known by what you signed that blows up and becomes hugely successful. Yeah. And, I really had to mature and not think that I needed to represent everybody or everything, that I needed to really drill down and focus on qualitative focus as opposed to quantitative, practice. And that was a big metamorphosis in my life of coming to that grip on that focus.
Wow. Absolutely.
So good, Jim.
Yeah.
What are you working on now?
Well, that's a good question I've got. I just finished, and the last 5 years, I mean, because, I don't really, I hate to say it, but there's no record business left. So I honestly don't like the music business. I love artists. I love music. I love great songs. I love making records. All the not I got into the business, I still love, but I don't love the music business because I call it the monkey business. It's not fun, and there's nobody working at a record label anymore that's having fun. There's no fun in the business, and it has nothing to do with why Harold and I fell in love with the music business. Yeah. So, I kind of focused the last 5 years. I've either bought or sold, buyer or seller side, some of the biggest catalogs in the world, and I've done over $1 billion in music catalog buyer or sales with, starting with Randy Bachman, with Bachman Turner Overdrive and Guess Who, and then Ann Wilson of the band Heart, and then Hank Williams Jr., I sold, or I was on the buyer side of his entire catalog. Dwight Yoakam's catalog, Steve Earle's catalog. I did the Gordon Lightfoot deal, famous Canadian singer-songwriter. I've done a whole bunch of catalog. I just closed the Ed King deal. Ed King was in Leonard Skinner. He wrote Sweet Home Alabama and a number of their big. And I sold both the publishing and the master royalty side of that deal. And we just closed that recently. And I've got a couple of new things that I'm doing. I'm very, very involved as more than a lawyer for Ann Wilson. Ann Wilson is lead singer of the band Heart, but she's one of the greatest female rock singers of all time. And I relocated her from Florida down the road from me, not far from where Harold's old house was in Brentwood. And so I'm an associate executive producer on the documentary we just made that I'm just in the process of. And I'm going out to LA next week, and we're beginning the process of setting up that documentary as what we hope is an award-winning documentary. And so I'm very, very involved with that career. Another one of Harold's oldest, kind of crazy friends, Tanya Tucker. I've been working with her for 17 years. She's a handful, but I've helped her out. Russ and I not recently put a little deal together on Tanya. I mean, the thing, even though I hate the music business, when you get to work with an artist like Ann Wilson, who's one of the greatest rock singers, or Tanya Tucker, no matter what you think about her, as one of the greatest country stylists of all time, completely unique singers that were unbelievable. And so there's still this satisfaction of working with genius. Like, if you know somebody is great or a genius, then there's still satisfaction that comes from that. Now, I have a company down in Memphis that's famous. It's a studio called Ardent, and they had a band called Big Star. Now, hardly anybody remembers the band Big Star, but they were one of the original American garage bands that ended up influencing what became garage band music, like Husker Du and the Replacements. And Alex Chilton was the lead singer of the Box Tops, and he had, of the Box Tops, but then of Big Star. And, Big Star is considered a really important band. But anyway, I represent the Ardent catalog, and the owner of the company passed away back in 2013. His widow I represent. So my next catalog deal may very well be the Ardent catalog deal that I broker and sell. And the other thing that I've kind of become a specialist in are copyright terminations. Under the U.S. Copyright Act, we have Section 203 and 304 where you can file termination notices, and authors and artists can get potentially file to get master recordings and song copyrights back. From 1978 on, it's a 35-year termination. Prior to 1978, it's a 56-year termination. And I've become kind of an expert on knowing how to do termination deals, how to properly file them, and then when you regain rights, what to do with the rights. So I've been kind of doing that. 95% of the time I work from my home office. I have an office on Music Row. I rarely ever go in there. In the meantime, I've got a couple of side things going that I don't even want to go into, because you would certainly say that I have gone off the deep end. I've gone off my rocker, and I've lost my marbles, in my aging, But I've got some, some crazy, not crazy, but just some strange things that don't have anything to do with discovering music, but it has to do with pulling certain things, out of Africa and figuring out how to get them into America legally. And I've kind of become a little bit of an expert in this very difficult game of, figuring out how you get gold out of Africa and you get it into America. And it's not easy, but I've dabbled in that a little bit. But anyway, and then besides that, I'm starting to write. I always dreamed of being a writer, and not purely a novelist, but I'm starting with a storytelling memoir. And certainly Harold will be a featured focal point of my writings. So I'm going to focus hopefully on becoming a full-time writer, I hope. I will still continue to hold on to a few of my clients because I've definitely shrunk my practice down to 5, 6, or 7 core clients, and I'm not really taking on any new clients, and I'm just kind of focusing on my little specialty and just doing kind of what I do.
That's great.
Cool, man.
Well, I hope we can assume that you're going to be part of our new venture here, because I think you're going to love some of the things we're doing. And
I would be thrilled to be involved with you. One of my greatest Harold Shedd experiences was going down to the dedication to you in Bremen. And I remember standing on the street corner when they changed the name of the street to Harold Shedd Boulevard.
Yeah, man.
And I have this, there was this big sign that said Harold Shedd Boulevard, and I've got a picture of you and me holding that sign, and it's going to be in my book, but
Yeah.
it's one of my classic greatest memories.
that was a great moment.
It was a
Yeah,
great
man.
moment in time.
And I appreciate you coming and being part of that.
That was so much fun, and I was so proud of you.
We always had fun,
and that was the key.
That was the key.
And it's harder to have fun. But if you guys are doing something out here in the woods that's fun, then I still like to have fun.
Well,
I'm still game. I'm an enthusiast. I love having fun.
Russ, he still works a lot with John, but I know y'all were partners one time too. But
We mean John Shackelford.
yes, but I consider you my friend and my guy. You made it all happen for me. So anything new that I venture into, I would still want you involved in it.
And the way I always looked at it is you allowed me to tag along with you. I just felt like I was your running buddy, and you allowed me to tag along because I learned so much from you, and we had so much fun and so much success. And I really feel like my relationship with you was the thing that caused me to be taken seriously in Nashville as a all-around entertainment lawyer rather than just this maverick rock and roll R&B guy from Memphis, Tennessee.
Well, you navigated me through some tough times, and I'm forever grateful for that.
Yeah. We had a lot of great times, and when we got together for the Kentucky Headhunters reunion, their 30-year reunion or whatever, and we were there at 3rd and Lindsley, and it was such a great moment for me to be sitting with you, and reliving and celebrating something that we had started together with that first signing, that first band. And we were there for the 30th anniversary, and that was a very special moment for me.
20 million records ago.
I know, it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, what a career, man. You guys were such an integral
what
part.
a pleasure it is to have you on the podcast Behind the Shed. I mean,
man.
we really appreciate you coming, and telling us.
It was an exciting journey today because I just kept going deeper and deeper.
That's great.
You know, in the Tennessee backwoods, and then I started going down these hollows. And, you know, I thought, man, there's going to be moonshiners. I know there's moonshine up in them there hills somewhere, you know.
It's been a fun journey as long as we don't have to get in the Zumwalt and come down these back roads. I'm good.
Yeah, and your memory of names and places and events is amazing.
Yeah, man.
When Brian Rawlings came out here yesterday, as soon as he opened the door on the car, he said, "I thought I was going to have my passport to get out here."
That's amazing. But this is a beautiful, beautiful place, and I wanted to make sure I got here on time. And you know, I noticed a couple of historic signs on the way in, and I'm going to stop and make sure
They were a blur on the way in.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop and read them and take a picture of them because I love Tennessee history, and I love the history of everywhere I go. And I know there's a lot of history right where we are right now, and, you know, I want to learn more about it.
Yeah, man. Hey, can I ask a couple questions I didn't get in? We can plug them in if they're good or bad. My bigger question for you that we didn't get to is when you had Zumwalt, Allman, and Hayes, that was always a unique firm to me, as we talked about. I mean, really unique. It's iconic if you think about those days. Are you aware of any other law firms that did it the way you guys did it? I mean, I don't remember every place like you guys in town. There were a lot of lawyers, because it was a big business, that were involved in all those aspects like that. You know, because you guys, it was, like you said, you ran it like a record company. I'm unaware of anybody else that did that. Now, am I crazy?
Well, there are, I'm sure there's other examples, but you know, my mentor was Brian Rohan, and the law firm that he started with his partner Michael Stepanian in San Francisco in 1964. Because he had come out of Stanford Law School and he was a criminal lawyer. Michael Stepanian is a super well-known San Francisco criminal lawyer. So when the law firm of Rohan and Stepanian formed at 819 Eddy Street in San Francisco, they were really a criminal law firm, but because San Francisco and the counterculture of the Vietnam War, and then you had Owsley and LSD and all the hippie scene in America, and all these hippies were getting arrested, and you know and Bill Graham was the promoter, and they started doing concerts to raise money, and this law firm got everybody out of jail, or you know, and got everybody off. And so, you know, the first important thing that Brian Rohan did in 1965 was to go bail out and get the Grateful Dead out of jail. And there's a picture of him in front of the jail with the Grateful Dead in 65. So as criminal lawyers, it led him into being the rock and roll lawyer, Bill Graham's lawyer, and the rock and roll lawyer of San Francisco. So the closest example I could give of a startup law firm evolving into what it became was that San Francisco law firm of Rohan and Stepanian. So you could say almost a generation later that Zumwalt, Allman, and Hayes was kind of like a reclamation and a reformation of that evolution of a law firm that wasn't a typical law firm. It was more of just a unique group of guys that happened to have a license to practice law, but they had a passion for music, and they were able to connect people in music. And that's mainly what we were catalysts and deal makers as opposed to classic lawyers. And I mean, I think that's the culture we built at Zumwalt, Allman, and Hayes.
Yeah, man.
It is. You knew what the client was and wanted and was trying to achieve because you guys were music men yourselves.
Yep.
That I think that was the really thing that set you apart was the fact I could get in the car with you and we could drive 4 hours, 5 hours and listen to music all the way and know what was good and what was bad about it. So you brought all of that into your law firm. You guys, Craig represented the Nevilles, and Orville and you represented me and many, many other more successful people. But it just, your firm was, it's very well known, and I don't think a person ever asked me if I knew a music lawyer that I didn't mention.
Same.
Jim Zumwalt.
Same.
You know.
And they represented the publishing company for
They
all
did.
all those big years
Yeah.
we had.
Yeah, you guys knew, you were like a record company except you were attorneys.
Yep.
And in a way, that's exactly right. And I still remember, I remind Linda Newmark, who was at Polygram Music Publishing, and we worked together with Russ. And when we sold the Shed House, Mill House catalogs to Polygram, I worked with Russ, but it was really Linda Newmark. And Linda Newmark is the head of catalog acquisitions for Universal Music Publishing in L.A. And, I've worked with her very, very closely, and I've closed several big catalog deals with her. But, I remind her of our beginning together, that first deal that we did, which was the Shed House, Mill House catalog deal that we ended up selling.
That's cool, man. You know what's bigger than all this stuff to me, though, in the very end, is that we were really business colleagues that turned into 40-year good friends. How often does that happen?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I just think that's the coolest thing of all. And we lost Orville and Craig, obviously, but man, those are some of the best times personally of my life. I know you guys' history too.
And we had some great parties.
We had some good fun.
I guess we had as many number one parties as anybody.
As anybody.
Yeah,
we sure did.
Yeah, Alabama had 21 in a row.
I know.
That's people tell me even today, you sure know how to throw a party.
Yeah.
But
remember the keg parties y'all used to have when you first started over there on the porch?
When there was an opportunity, like when the Nashville Entertainment Association Extravaganza, we used to have the opening night party. And, back in, this was more late 80s, early 90s, when we would get A&R people in from L.A. and New York, we'd throw a party, or we'd have a Christmas party, or we'd have another party, whatever, during those years. And that little bungalow at 1014 16th Avenue South was, it kind of, was a unique party place.
it was.
Absolutely.
Man. I remember the Oak Ridge Boys, William Golden, right?
William Lee, yeah.
William Lee Golden. We had the grand opening 1983 party in November of '83 for the opening of Zumwalt, Ullman, and Hayes. We invited everybody that we could think of to come to that party. And about halfway, 9 o'clock at night or whatever, a limo pulled up in front on 16th Avenue, and William Lee Golden got out. And he came to the door and knocked on the door, and somebody said, "Jim, William Lee Golden's at the door." And he didn't want to come into the party, but he wanted to give a gift. And he had a large sack full of peanuts. And, in the shelled peanuts. And that was the gift. And I didn't realize, I guess maybe, I don't know if he grew up on a peanut farm and, down in Alabama or Georgia.
Yeah, they probably came from Bruton, Alabama.
They might have. But that was his gift, for welcome to Nashville.
That's fun.
And that was a very memorable moment.
That's fun. That's so cool. Wow. All right.
Well, guys, this has been one of my favorite podcasts so far.
Me too.
And it's so great to be with you again, Jim, and to have you come and visit and enlighten us and remind us of why we're here. So
yeah, man.
I know you're why I'm here.
Well, it's kind of you to say that, but I don't want this to be the last chapter of a book. But, if a book can have 35 chapters, I hope this is just chapter 23.
Well put.
So let's put some more history on the cultural map, okay?
I'd love to do that.
Let's figure out some fun things we can do together that. Because I think there's still a little more history we can make together.
There's more to be done yet.
Yeah,
I believe that.
Okay.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me very much.
Today's episode was brought to you by Wild Bill's Fireworks, PopChevy.com, and the Kent Rose Foundation. This episode is also brought to you by theforkend.com. Tune in next week to the music station, WWCC with Harold Shedd, broadcasting live from beautiful downtown Bremen, Georgia, 1440 on your radio dial. What you just heard just happened. Thank you for listening to Behind the Shed. We hope you enjoyed it. Tune in next week as we go Behind the Shed.